So everybody should have a copy of the bylaws. We ran them by you, the council, actually last May, to give you a chance to say if you liked them or not, any changes. So not too many people said anything other than that's pretty cool, so you're stuck with it. What you see is what you get, because we adopted them in October and they're now official. So I also want to say one other thing. There are revised statutes for our whole community. They were approved on March 22nd. There were nothing was taken out of the statutes, but we added several things. And since I was working on the statutes revision, the same time I was working on the bylaws, and I knew Father Vitt had already agreed to everything, these bylaws, although they're dated in October, reflect the new statutes that weren't approved until March. So just in case anybody has concerns, if you're a parliamentary nerd like I am, you know, just to make sure you don't have any concerns, the dates all line up whether they look like they do or not. So with that, I want to walk you through, point out a few highlights more as a matter of explanation. We'll work through this piece by piece just so you know, as we say, ongoing formation. So what I want to start on the front page, of course, inside the cover. When you open the cover, there's a few little things about, you know, our approval as a fraternity on the side, just so you know a little bit about, you know, the legality of our fraternity, you know, because we don't have to deal with legalities under the canon law. So that little page on the left there is to just kind of let you know how things are. So then we're going to start with a mission statement. Everybody has to have a mission statement, and, you know, I'm not going to go through the whole mission statement, but I want to highlight a couple of sentences. In the second and third line, it says, we are called by baptism to holiness, are called by the Holy Spirit to follow the example of St. Francis of Assisi, who made Christ the inspiration and center of his life. Well, it's kind of a well done, but you need to put it in the mission statement to make it very clear. And then if you drop down to the next paragraph, starting the second line, our spirituality is centered on the person and on the following of Christ. Christ, poor and crucified, is our book in which we find the purpose and the way of life. So I kind of connect that together. So everything about the mission statements, all the nice, pretty legalities you got to say, we follow the rule of 1883, etc. But those two sentences get to the heart of Francis and his spirituality as we seek to follow them. So that's the core of our mission statement. And then the last sentence, we pledge full communion with the Pope, bishops, and priests, and unwavering obedience to the magisterium of the Catholic Church and its teachings. Now we know from studying Francis that was absolutely a big deal with Francis, and in fact was the main reason why Francis was able to get all of his orders approved by Rome, because there were a lot of heretical groups out there. And St. Dominic, you know, became famous by preaching against those heresies. And Francis, on the other hand, was saying, my people are totally committed to the church, to the Pope, etc. So we're bringing forward that commitment from Francis to our mission statement. And also our rule, chapter 1, number 4, requires that of us. So it's all right here. So there's the 25 words or less about everything we're all about so that you have access to it. And then you have the table of contents, just to give you an idea of all the things we're covering. But something you may not know, chapter 9 and chapter 10 are about transferring into the fraternity if you're already a member of the TOF, or transferring in if you know someone from the OFS who would like to transfer in. So we've got those procedures in here, and the appendix A, B, D, and E are all about the transfer, so we have documents and everything. So, you know, we won't need to spend any time on it, but if you know somebody who, you know, might want to join us, you know, we have all the necessary information right here, you know, in the bylaws for your reference. Okay, chapter 1. I'm not going to go through every paragraph, but I went some high points for you. 1.1. The life of Franciscan tertiaries is lived in community known as fraternities. That's why we're a fraternity. This is our community. We don't live in a convent, but we live in community. And you go down to 1.4, the fraternity is an association of the Christian faithful and a third order according to precepts of the Code of Canon Law. I actually should have said a public association. So there's a difference between public associations and private associations. We're a public association, which means the church has blessed us to be who we are. So I really should have made that comment in there, so I have to clarify that later. And then I quote the canon law for you anyway, so that it talks about the spirit of religious institute while in secular life, leading an apostolic life, strive for Christian perfection under the higher direction of that same institute. In other words, we're tertiaries of the OFM province of the Immaculate Conception. That's really what all that churchy language in the canon law is saying. That therefore we can do who we are, and we can create our own statutes, which we did, and out of those statutes follow the bylaws, which we did. A third order is the object and purpose of our fraternity is to form its members in Christian perfection. Christian perfection, that's churchy language. Holiness, to form us in holiness. If we were convent religious, vowed religious, we would be seeking the life of perfection. We're lay people. Therefore, we're seeking Christian perfection. And that's a slight distinction in church language. So just so you know that, we're headed down the same road, but we are not locked in by vows to a life of perfection. But we are required by our rule to seek Christian perfection, if you see that distinction. So that's kind of an important thing about who we are. And then 1.6, our program of sanctification and way of life, the rule promulgated by the Third Order by Pope Leo XIII. So that's important, the rule. It defines as our program of sanctification and way of life. That's what a rule is. It's what we've adopted. So that's the definition of that. 1.7, we're organized under blah, 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 canon law, et cetera, but we need to put that in there because that's the ladder. Canon law, the rule, the constitutions, all of which come from the Holy See, the statutes, which we're permitted to publish as a third order and are approved by the provincial, and then our bylaws. So that's in there so you know the hierarchy, everything that the legal stuff, the language that we follow. And then the bottom line, the purpose of the bylaws assist us in achieving Christian perfection. So what the whole purpose of these bylaws are is to give us more specific guidance. Instead of just showing up, meeting together, fellowship, prayer, etc., there's a program we're part of. And in case we lose sight of that, that's what 1.8 reminds us, that we're a program and a purpose that we have. Now, the interpretation of bylaws belong to the council. So if you ever have any questions about the bylaws, then the council is where you want to refer those questions. Okay, so just so you know. Now, that's kind of the whole outlay of what the fraternity is. That's kind of the legal mumbo jumbo, if you will, but we have to say it. But also, look again, there was that spiritual point, Christian perfection, seeking holiness. Our Lord said, pray to be perfect as your Holy Father is perfect. That's what we're all about. Otherwise, why are we here? So you want to keep that in mind as you look at all the other things in this rather legislative document. So chapter 2, the Fraternity Council. So 2.1, the internal government of the fraternity as a moral person comes under the council. Now, that's again a legal thing, but under canon law, our fraternity exists as a moral person. And the council represents that moral person and has the authority over it to make decisions and so on. So it's a very important point in canon law, but it's also very important to know the role of the council. Again, the next purpose of the council is to promote the gospel of perfection. And then the duty of the council, and there's all these, I'm not going to read all those things. You can read them at your leisure, but we list out there so you know what it is the council, what we're doing in your behalf. So if you have any questions, it's all right there. And in 2.4, what is the council composed of? So give all the officers. Now, in our particular fraternity, we elect more than just one counselor, but here you have the minister, the vice minister, master formation. And remember, that was one thing we discovered as we reread, the legal nerd that I am, digging through the constitutions, oh, by the way, the Master of Formation is an elected office. It used to be appointed, because that's what we were working under. But, the legal nerd here figured that out. So, Debbie's got an elected position. And then Secretary, Treasurer, and counselors. And, Roberto mentioned the primitive rule. All the way back time of St. Francis, you had 2 ministers who ran the local fraternity, and they were assisted by a secretary and a treasurer as necessary. So, here we are, 600 years later, right? 800 years later, same offices, just a little fancier clarification. But then down the second paragraph there, to be a member of the council is not an office of honor, but of service to the fraternity. Now that goes all the way back to Francis, and those of you who studied the admissions, as you're coming through the novitiates, Francis was very big on servant leadership, and that's what the council is all about. It's about service leadership. Now, I'm not going to read the next several pages. It tells you everybody who's a member of the council, what their responsibilities and duties are. Again, you can read all that over at your leisure, but everything is laid out there as best we can as what each individual officer within the council is responsible for doing for you as the fraternity. But paragraph G on page 7, the archivist. Just want to mention the archivist briefly. That's a council-appointed position, but it's from within the council. So, the archivist, the person who's responsible for keeping the official records, is a member of the council, so that the council always has control over the records of the fraternity. Now, Pepe's been an archivist for a while, so one day there's going to be a transition there. We're trying to figure out what that all looks like. But nonetheless, that's what we have, the archivist. Next is elections. Now that whole section on elections, that's what we did in October. We went down this section of our bylaws, you may recall, line by line, as we conducted the elections. So again, it's all here, and it's in the statutes, okay? And again, the parliamentary nerd that I am, I found that digging through the constitutions as well. It had been overlooked when we first wrote the statutes, because they're trying to get the community up and running. So they were trying to get up and running, and some of the finer points were not the priority back in October of 2000. But, as we have a chance to now think about it and let it cook, so to speak. So everything there, I think you read it yourself, but I will mention again in subparagraph 1 of paragraph A, 7 councilors shall be elected. That has to be specified in the bylaws according to constitutions. And why do we do that? Well, you got 4 councilors who are required to be elected. And they end up being the vice minister, the master of formation, the secretary and treasurer. Well, we need an archivist, and those 4 people are already pretty busy, so that was the 5th person. And over time, we've learned we need folks to do special projects. So that's why we have 7 counselors, to make our council a total of 8, not counting Father Vitt. So it has to be in the bylaws, so it's there. I just want to let you know that we're in compliance with the Constitution, for those of you who are parliamentary nerds like me. Okay. Next is council meetings. We meet once a month. You can read most of this for yourself. We'll just tell you we do meet electronically, Zoom meeting. We wrote that in the bylaws, so there's never any question. We do that. It's wonderful. We love Zoom meetings in the council. You come down to E, paragraph E, 7E. The minutes of the council meetings are approved at the following meeting and kept in the archives. These minutes are confidential. And that's because some of the stuff we talk about, out of charity, doesn't need to be spread around. But it's important business for the council. So therefore, just so you know, we do keep minutes, in case you ever wonder. We do keep minutes, and they are confidential. However, if you had a particular reason you needed access to that, you would petition the council to have access to those minutes. Now, another thing, besides two other things we publish as a council are the Il Poverello, our newsletter, and the annual report. So those are all things that fall out of the council meetings, fall out of the minutes, and are part of our records. 2.8, the newsletter now, to come to Il Poverello, a couple of things about it. I'm going to jump to C first. Il Poverello represents the voice of the council. So when you read Il Poverello, what Susan has done is summarized in a non-confidential way all those things we've done. And that's what, as it says B, her responsibility. She's not a member of the council, but Susan is there to keep a record so that you know what we're doing. So it's not exactly a smoke-filled room when we meet on those Zoom meetings. The record is there, but if you ever wanted more detail for some particular reason, that again, you would petition the council. D, very important. All members of the fraternity, I'm going to say it again, all members of the fraternity are invited and encouraged to write articles for Il Poverello. Particularly, to give Susan a break, that opening page, where she has these wonderful thoughts. If something like that moves you, write it, send it to Susan. She might not publish it this month, but she'll take it and work with it. So please remember that every one of you here can contribute to the newsletter. Don't be just a passive receiver. I'm okay with that, Susan? I'll pay you afterwards. Okay, fraternity website. We all know we have a website. And again, there's a webmaster. Right now it's Pepe also. So one of these days, this man's got to give up a couple hats. And he's not here for me to harass him. But anyway, it is first and foremost, number one, to be another forum for ongoing formation, especially for access to the rule, the constitutions, the statutes, and the ritual. Well, today, how many of us use our cell phone to pull up the website to have the ritual of renewal our profession? So it's a very important service that the website provides for us. And just so you know, you can find back issues of both the Il Poverello and the Troubadour, the community newsletter, right there on the website. And you also find the map posts, by the way. Those are all there, so you can, you don't have to keep paper copies and print it out. If you're a computer person, you can go and find it on a computer, bring it up, and there it is for you to refer to. So that's enough said there. Chapter 3, 3.1. The whole purpose of 3.1 is to define what it means to be a member. What does it mean to be professed? What does it mean to be a novice? What does it mean to be a postulant and inquirer? So, professed and novitiates are members. Postulants and inquirers are on the way towards membership and profession. So we clarify those definitions for you here. And then we also have a category called affiliates, which right now we have two, Annie and Fred, who are affiliates. If you know someone else that fits that category, the information's there, gives you the procedure. But back to the first two categories, membership and other participants. Chapter 3.2c, which is below, says that attendance at the fraternity monthly gathering is expected. Preferred if you're an inquirer, once you become postulant and as a novice and as a member, expected. So just so you know that. And then of course, one of the things it talks about there is you can always let Jim know or another member of the council if you're not able to be there to provide that information. So that's all that just needs to be said there. Except when I come back to at the beginning of fraternity guides, a monthly meeting of the fraternity is the third order's substitute for the community life of a convent religious. That's the critical point. That's why these meetings, St. Francis himself said we need to have these meetings once a month to meet with a priest for instruction and for fellowship and support of each other in prayer. So we're complying with St. Francis. Again, 800 years later. Okay, page 11, number 4, spiritual direction. I'm not going to say a lot there, but I'll just point out number 4.1. We share in the spirit of the Order of Friars Minor of the Province of Immaculate Conception. That's back to that point from canon law that we are part of we share in their institute. So we can't be who we are without the friars. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And in 4.3, spiritual direction and guidance of fraternity is entrusted to the provincial, right now Father Robert Campagna, and this is an election year for the province. So There will be a new provincial at some point. And then at a local level, the spiritual director appointed by him. Well, we all know who that is. So therein lies that. So that's all needs to be said on that page. And we'll skip over the rest of that. So we come to chapter 5. Now, all of page 12, I'm not going to read that to you. When you read over to page 12, you're going to say, that sounds familiar. Yes, because Father Vitt wrote it for us, and you've heard it from this very podium once or twice. But when we came to the idea of what is the spiritual life of the fraternity, Father Vitt wanted to define that for us very carefully. So every time you read page 12, Father Vitt is sitting on your shoulder, whispering in your ear. Now on to page 13. The next paragraphs, 5.6, 5.7, 5.8, and 5.9. Frequent renewal of our profession. Gee, didn't we just do that today? Aren't we supposed to do that again on the 16th? Our bylaws say we do it today as a fraternity, but then the Constitution say on the 16th we do it individually. And then there's more to say about renewal of profession later when we get to indulgences. 5.7, praying the divine office. Pray the office daily. B, Christian prayer. That's what we do here, and it's mandated for the meeting. Whether at home you choose to use the full 4-volume breviary or the 1-volume book, that's up to you. Or if you want to vary that up sometime with the little Office of Blessed Virgin, that's there too. D, that's a major change since Vatican II. The Office of 12 Fathers is no longer normative. Rules is what constitutes an office was changed. So that was withdrawn as an approved office. However, under exceptional circumstances, one could still revert to the Office of 12 Fathers if one needed to. So, that's an important change. That's the big change there. It's exceptional circumstances only for that. Then next, 5.8, adoration, visit the Blessed Sacrament. No more needs said about that. Number 9, Lectio Divina. Not much more needs to say about that. So those 4 things right there. Renewal of our profession, reciting the office, visit the Blessed Sacrament, Lectio Divina. That's the core of our spiritual exercises as a fraternity. Then you get 5.10, lists a whole bunch of other things that you could do. So I won't go through all those except to mention number 8, contemplating the 5 knots on the cord of the habit. Our habit, scapular and cord, are sacramental. The Church encourages us to use sacramentals to reflect on things in our prayer life. So here we're reminded that one of those sacramentals is indeed our cord. Number 11 is important. That's in the rule. Some of you may have missed that. That we're to fast on the vigil of St. Francis, October 3rd, and we're to fast on the vigil of the Solemnity of Immaculate Conception on December 7th. That's in the rule. So you may or may not have been aware of that. We want to make sure it's there for you. And then 12, abstention from meat on Wednesdays or fasting on Fridays. To both is commendable. That's a holdover from back in the day when there's a much more rigorous set of restrictions in the rule. Now B, a lot of dates there. Those are all dates that we could take time and should take time. Try to go to Mass if you can to celebrate those dates. But otherwise, take time, to individually recall those dates. They're all laid out in the statutes, and as it says, there's some that come from the constitutions. Number 12, when we meet October 3rd and 4th, that's the transitus, which we do every year. So it's there for us. C, we shall observe the memorial of their profession patron saint with special devotion. I would hope most of you are doing that anyway. But if you're not, the reminder is there to, make sure you try to go to Mass that feast day. And then down to F, the Franciscan wake service. We've said a lot about that, just so you know it's written here. And the last form in the back of the book is also about the wake service. So that's enough said on that. Indulgences. That's one of the new things. Paul changed all that. And you may or not remember from when I talked about indulgences, all the old indulgences that were there for the Third Order Franciscan were abrogated by Paul VI revisions. But then in January of 1972, we received the new grant of indulgences. But the important thing about Paul's indulgences is number one there, the spirit of prayer. All the indulgences that we typically look at, Paul VI made the point, prayer first. Prayer first. Worry about the indulgence second. Which used to be the other way around. So prayer, prayer, prayer. That's the most important thing about his revision of indulgences. And to make them accessible to us. So then Roberto mentioned Blessed Lucesio. And you'll read in the Matt Post next month about Margaret Catuna, because I'm not sure very many of you are familiar with Margaret. So we'll talk about her in the Matt Post. But those 8 other dates, the other dates are all dates you know, and in fact those other 6 dates are also part of the particular observances. So things interlock. But again, on those 8 days, when you renew your profession, you are eligible for a plenary indulgence, assuming all the other circumstances are met, as explained. But in 6.4, I think is important. No effort at indulgence is wasted. If for some reason the plenary indulgence doesn't work out, to take time to renew your profession devoutly carries with it a partial indulgence. And that's the most important thing about paragraph 3.4. 6.5 just mentioned the Portinuclean indulgence is still on the books. And 6.5, the Franciscan Crown Rosary, while it was previously indulgence, is no longer among the list of approved indulgences. Why? Because that's one of the things that Paul VI was after. He wanted only devotions, prayers that were for all the faithful. The Crown Rosary is a Franciscan devotion. And they're Dominican devotions, So Paul VI said, do that within your own order, knock yourself out. But for indulgences, we want to have things that are common to all the faithful across all the church. That was his focus after prayer, was to focus on prayers that everybody in the church could share. So enough said on indulgences unless there's a question. Then number 7, formation. Well, you pretty well know that, but I want to emphasize 7.2. Formation is an ongoing process of conversion that starts before entrance into the order and continues throughout life. In other words, if somebody says, hey, that's a good idea, maybe I'll go talk to those Franciscan people. At that moment, their formation has begun. And it doesn't stop till we draw our last breath. So I want to make sure that's clear. And then the next one, 7, tells you what the purpose of it is. Back to that Christian perfection that we talked about. And 7.4, how to, love of scriptures, and prayer. Everything else will take care of it from those 2 points as it falls out. Then 7.5 is key. For the fraternity to attain its purpose, all formations, they have 3 elements. Full accord with Catholic doctrine. Well, that's a well duh, but we got to say it. Clarity and complete conformity with Catholic Church teaching. Thank goodness that we have the Catechism of the Catholic Church, edited by some guy named Ratzinger. Okay? And then formation is to challenge us to conversion and perfection. In other words, it's not a passive thing. It's to challenge us to move forward again. That's why, again, we come together every month. Whether it's Father Vitt, somebody like me, or both of us up here saying something, that's the whole point of ongoing formation, to challenge us and to lead us forward. 7.6, just to mention that, again, formation under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and it lays out all the options that are there. And I remind you also that the Troubadour and the Mat Post and the website are all instruments of ongoing formation. So don't limit yourself to reflection. You want to make a day of private reflection, you could sit there with your computer and read 2 or 3 or 4 issues of the Troubadour and then meditate on them. Because back to that, we're supposed to make an annual, a month, 0.3, 11.4, 11.5, well, 11.2, we meet in the church, so the council's doing its thing. But 11.3, 11.4, 11.5, what is it that members of the fraternity should be doing in relation to the church? Talks about your parish, talks about initiatives within the diocese, and then also critical initiatives that are across the whole spectrum, like pro-life, sanctity of marriage, the vitality of the family. So those three things define where we should put our energy in terms of relations with church programs. And in fact, in the Constitution, Article 4 says that we as a gospel leaven in the world are to give stability and strength to the Christian life within the church. So our first priority as members of Third Order is to strengthen life within the church in accordance with 3, 4, and 5. And then we have opportunities to go beyond our parish, to larger dioceses and so on. So that's kind of to keep that focus there for you. 11.6, important, take care to avoid conflicts with obligations of family and fraternal life. Don't we all once in a while get so tied up in things we lose sight of what's important? So that's just a reminder. And then finally, we should own a copy of the Catechism. We should be studying the Catechism all the time. Chapter 12, communications. That's new. That was something that we've worked on very carefully, Pepe and I. So number 1, all official communication and representation of the fraternity belong to the council. Only the council can make representation and be official for this fraternity. As individual members, we cannot represent the council unless the council delegates us. Unless the council delegates us. So, number 2, somebody may say, hey, how about, give a talk about the fraternity or write something for our church newsletter or whatever. You can do that. That's what number 2 talks about. But it says just make sure what you do and how it's worded and how it's interpreted, you're not officially representing the fraternity or the order. You're speaking as a private person. So that's all I need to say there. And in 12.3, same thing. We just talked about come and see. And you may say, gee, I want to go set up a display at my church. Fine. But you can't do it without the council's permission. Because when you set up a display at your church to proclaim our come and see and invite people, you're now representing the fraternity. That requires the council's approval. That's all that's saying. Do it, but plan ahead and get permission from the council first. That's really all it's saying to you. And then number 12.4 again, welcome, encourage to contribute to the newsletter or the website. You're always encouraged to do that. 13, you can read amendments for yourself. What's important there is that any member can propose an amendment, a professed member. So if a novice is burning to submit an amendment, they got to have their sponsor say, hey, do this for me. So otherwise, it's enough said about the rest of that. The final paragraph at the bottom comes out of St. Francis himself from his first recommendation to the faithful, which many consider to be the origin of the rule. We were originally called brothers and sisters of penance, to those who do penance, and it's beautiful words from our founder himself. And that, my friends, is the bylaws that your council has put together for you. Are there any questions? Good. As Father Vitz says, I must have been perfectly clear.
Thank you, Virgil.
So while I think about it, if you're interested in a brochure or two to take, to somebody you think might be interested in fraternity, that's what's in this box I'll leave up here on the podium. Because we got more than I thought we had. I only thought we had about half a dozen. We got more than I thought. So if you want a brochure, there they are.
So these bylaws has been an ongoing work for quite some time. We appreciate all the effort that Virgil and Pepe did to get this document to fruition, and all the reviews that the council did time and time again. And finally, we have a document that we can say it's updated and it's good.
The council's a tough act. I propose these things, and we would, just like doing a Hollywood movie, the script gets reworked 3 times before the writer finalizes it. The council was very careful very precise. We often went back and were careful about what specific verb we used. We were very, very precise about that. They kept me honest.
Thank you, Virgil.